Greetings, friends. It's Monday, February 27th, and we've got some Chapo coming at you. Felix is off today, so it's me and Matt. But fear not, joining us today for the entire episode is returning champion Will Sommer. Will, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Or welcome back to the show, I should say. But you're here today to discuss, we're talking about your new book, Trust the Plan, about everyone's favorite, heuristic dream state that is now altering and shaping our reality. We're talking QAnon on the show with Will Sommer, and you just got a book out covering your many years immersing yourself in QAnon lore. And I guess what I want to begin with today, taking a sort of a wide angle, the widest possible lens for understanding this phenomenon now, 3, 4, 5 years on now, is I was thinking about something my friend Jacob Bacharach said on Twitter the other day in response to a New York Times article about the astonishing number of undocumented, unparented, migrant children who are being gang pressed into working at slaughterhouses and factories. And his point was that QAnon is sort of in the same way, it's a blind man discussing an elephant version of describing the actual contours of exploitation and oppression, particularly of children in this country. But it's a narrative in which Joe and Jane suburbia can cast themselves as the victim of this same process, this same process of immiseration, evil, and horror that that our brains have a hard time computing or wrapping themselves around. So, Will, could you just begin there talking about how you view QAnon as as a sort of a folk mythology that describes much of American culture?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that a lot of the appeal is that there are these weird things out there in the world that are undeniably true. And I certainly don't want to be saying that, the government is always nice, or there's no conspiracies, or Jeffrey Epstein's death wasn't suspicious, and all this stuff. And I think you're right that it kind of, these weird things in the world, people start looking for answers, and that some of them are drawn to QAnon. But on a broader level, it is also true that, the way society is set up, it favors, very powerful people to exploit vulnerable people, many of them children. Certainly I've been at these events where someone will bring up the idea of labor trafficking or labor exploitation, and everyone's like, "Oh, who cares?" Back to these kind of really intense, like child grabbed off the street sort of stories. And so, I think it both makes QAnon makes the victims of this more appealing. It makes them certainly seem whiter, and it also casts the QAnon believer in this kind of avenging angel. I mean, they call themselves digital soldiers. It sort of gives them this role in this not just a global struggle, but a sort of a heaven and hell level struggle.
I mean, and the detail that Jacob was pointing out in this New York Times article is that one of the jobs that the child labor that children are being forced into doing, if it's not cleaning a slaughterhouse, is literally making frozen pizzas, I think, in food factories. So his point was that Pizzagate is real, but children are being kidnapped and forced to actually make the pizzas that people eat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very fitting. It is, you often we're talking to QAnon believers, and they sort of point to something. They'll say, "Don't you think that's messed up?" And I'll say, "Well, yeah, but I mean, it's kind of the leap in logic to then, for example, they look at immigrant exploitation across the border, and then they say, so as a result, these people are being trafficked so that Hillary Clinton can eat their adrenochrome, stuff like that, and so they have to jazz it up."
Yeah, but it's boring otherwise. It's just the depressing reality of living under a system that they are not in any way equipped to genuinely challenge. I mean, they accept and embrace capitalism as a concept and as an organizing principle for a society. They can't really absorb the implications of that and what it means in practice, but they have to acknowledge, if for no other reason than their own screaming psychic pain, that things aren't good and things are messed up. So it has to become a fantasy that allows them to imagine themselves, yes, as God soldiers against satanic hordes, and it has to be sexual. It has to have that sexual basis to it, or else why should I care? Why is it worth me unsheathing my digital blade if it's not going to get me off? Because at the end of the day, online politics of all stripes is people choosing to entertain themselves. It's not like changing anything. I mean, that would be nice, but it's really more about spending time that would otherwise be watching Family Feud or something, and also maybe make some friends at the rallies. That's it. And if that's the motive, if it's going to be about enjoyment, then why wouldn't you choose the most luridly, narratively sexual and violent tapestry that you could weave? And you're not going to get jazzed up by looking at tables full of lists of child exploitation in factories or something. What's the point of that?
Yeah, I mean, you still want frozen pizza, like a 12-year-old being kidnapped and forced to clean a slaughterhouse. Is, I don't know. Yeah, it's just it doesn't have it, But if you can, like I said, like the way QAnon has evolved into a kind of, like, I think it's become a catch-all for like a 21st century like neo-sex panic. And like it's very, like I think it's very much led to this current situation of the demonization of like teachers, trans teenagers, trans people in general. But yeah, like the sexual, like the sexualization of children and child abuse is such a load bearing like part of this whole mythology. But like I could go into a couple examples, but Will, I mean, you made a lot of friends on the road studying this, but like it does seem to be like not a lot of, but I will say several prominent QAnon promoters have been recently arrested for child pornography and the abuse of children.
Yeah. I mean, one guy I've covered a lot is this guy named Phil Godlewski, who is I think a former assistant volleyball coach or something, and sort of turned QAnon emperor. I mean, this is a guy who, through his selling silver and stuff like this, has just sort of emerged from nothing to be buying multi-million-dollar houses for everyone in his family or, his dad. But this is a guy who also, as soon as you look briefly at his record, had, a corrupting a minor charge that he pleaded down on after, as working as a teacher or as a coach. Basically, there was a teenage girl whose boyfriend had killed himself, and then he kind of swooped in there and was, sleeping with her all across Pennsylvania because he was a realtor, had access to all these houses. And then, all of these kind of gruesome details that have come out now. Of course, he claimed this is all sort of planted by the deep state to stitch him up. But, and his fans are really like, wow, Phil, they're really, the cabal is out to get you, man. There's a lot of evidence on this case.
Yeah.
The more open and shut it is, the more dangerous I am to the deep state. They wouldn't put in the effort to frame me so well if I wasn't a threat to them.
Well, it's a lot of these classic, driving with the front facing camera videos where he's like, oh God, they got me again.
Manufactured some more evidence, but I don't know. I mean, I just think about this in terms of like the libs of TikTok panic, and like the woman who runs that account comes from the Chabad community, which is, has a long history of sexually abusing kids. I mean, this is not like made up. It's been a problem in this community for a while. So I just wonder, like, if you grow up like that and around things like that, or you become to like, accept certain things as like just normal and natural, like then you think about what your political enemies might be doing with kids, and you're like, oh well, then if this is what I know is happening among good people or like people like me, then to extrapolate out what my political opponents are doing is like, then you can really let the fantasy drive kick into gear.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think QAnon has provided the right, even for people who don't say like, where we go when we go all, or I love Q. It's helped normalize this idea of saying that your opponents are all pedophiles, or that there's this larger kind of conspiracy theory of grooming and trying to corrupt children. And so in that way, I think it's really sort of been integrated into the right's larger ecosystem, and it's policies from Ron DeSantis, stuff like that.
Well, let's go back to the beginning though, because like it's in October 2017 is when someone using the name Q posts the first of their many drops on 4chan. And the post itself, like the thing that kicked this all off, was the following: Hillary Clinton will be arrested between 7:45 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday morning, October 30th, 2017. If that's the first thing that's kicking this all off, I mean, like, I mean, to use the parlance of QAnoners, is this a clue here to what's going on here? Because Hillary Clinton's still at large.
That's a hologram.
Right. Well, Matt, I think that you might be a great QAnon promoter because I haven't heard the hologram yet. But as you said, I mean, okay, if a guy pops on and he says Hillary Clinton's going to be arrested by the end of the week, I think maybe let's see if he's right. We'll see if she's arrested by the end of the week. And in that case, she wasn't. And instead, and in sort of a hint of where it was all headed, they decided, she's wearing an ankle bracelet and that's why her pant leg is baggy, or that's a clone, all this kind of stuff. And so they really pretty quickly adapted to the idea of sort of dealing with the cognitive dissonance by making up new things.
Well, yeah, like if your first proof is something that is like is stating something very clearly and is falsifiable. Either she'll be arrested Monday morning or she won't. And by all accounts, it doesn't seem like she's been arrested. So like as Q evolved and as it caught on, I mean, like, do you see in that a reason for why the drops began to get more and more cryptic and like Nostradamus, like in that they were very open to interpretation as to like actual things happening in reality?
Yeah, I mean, I was just about to bring up that from these very hard deadlines, it then gets to saying, everyone get ready for D5, and people assume, oh, that's going to be December 5th, and then that comes, oh, I guess we were wrong about December 5th, or it gets even vaguer than that, and they say, watch the water. So every time it rains, QAnon people are saying, oh, damn, they're trying to drown the pedophiles in the tunnels, stuff like that. And so you kind of, you broaden it that widely, and people can get whatever they want out of it. It can be, if you're into yoga, it's about yoga, or natural oils and all this kind of stuff. And you can sort of, it's a sort of a choose your own adventure with, and you can lead you all the way to January 6th.
Well, we can get there, but like, how did you get like on the Q beat to begin with? Because, we've had you on the show a couple of times before covering like sort of the online right. But when did you first notice QAnon and start thinking about it as something that would like maybe worth covering as a curiosity, if not like a national phenomenon that it became?
Sure. So I was covering, I was just checking 4chan for sort of things to cover and seeing if anything was bubbling up. And I started to notice these threads in the fall of 2017 where they would have a big lion and it would say the calm before the storm. And I ignored it for a while and they kept doing it. And then QAnon people announced that there would be a march in DC in the spring of 2018. And so I thought, I don't know, maybe like a dozen people are going to come to this. And so I went, and it was shortly after a Pizzagate rally I'd been to that it started giving me a sense that things were popping off. I mean, there were these kids with shirts that said, I'm not pizza. So it's like, John Podesta, don't eat me. And so, just imagine explaining that to your 5-year-old.
I like the idea of that. That's actually kind of giving Podesta and the sickos a little bit of credit there. They're like, maybe they don't realize that they're eating children. Maybe they just aren't. They're busy, pizza. They got all these important jobs to do in DC, and they just are picking up something. Oh, that's a kid. I'm sorry. You've only been properly labeled.
So I went to this QAnon march shortly after that, and it was hundreds of people chanting, where we go one, we go all, and saying they were going to get the sickos out of office. And I thought, well, this is going to be the high water mark for this. I'll never hear of this again. And, it only got bigger. And so, at one point, a guy with a armored truck shut down a bridge near the Hoover Dam. And was sort of
funny.
he was saying, Trump, you got to release the real report. Q said you would. And eventually he refused to talk to his lawyer. He said he would only talk to Laura Loomer and all this stuff. And that was really when I thought, this is getting a little out of hand.
You mentioned it briefly, but can we go back to where we go one, we go all, which is like the QAnon tagline. How did a throwaway line from like a totally forgotten Ridley Scott sailboat movie starring Jeff Bridges?
But there was only one way.
We'll do it together. I can't. Climb!
To survive on his ship.
I will challenge them, and they will come together.
Become a team.
Where we go one, we go all.
I swear to God, I remember seeing this movie in the theater. And I thought it was great. And when I was a kid, I remember crying at the end of the movie. It's about a fucking it's about like these rich kids who go on like a sailboat trip and then they go into a hurricane or something and one of them dies. But I don't remember that line of that movie at all. Like, how the fuck did this line from this movie? Like, is this movie popular among QAnon people? Like, how did this get started?
Well, so whoever runs Q is obsessed with movies and really weird movies. And so, like you say, I mean, movies that really are very forgettable. And so this movie you mentioned, as you said, it's kind of like a Dead Poets Society vibe. You know, some bad kids are getting reformed. It really is like, you know, when the substitute wheels in the TV. It feels like that, one of those movies. And so, as you said, I mean, they said a couple times in that movie where we go one, we go all. And then Q resurrects this and says, this is our slogan. And, you know, we're all in this together. Now, a funny thing is, once people track it down to this movie, and it looks a little ridiculous to be picking this movie up as your big rallying cry, they said, well, no, actually, it said that that was the inscription on the bell on JFK's boat. It was just completely made up, you know, and they insist, they sort of retconned this much more noble backstory.
What are some other movies that play big into the QAnon lore? Because, White Squall, that's how bad that movie is. They let Ridley Scott direct a movie, the title of which was White Squall. What a fucking terrible name for a movie. But I guess that, you know, A Storm is a big part of it. But what are some other like lesser known films that have worked their way into the QAnon canon?
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to think about it. Definitely some of the more famous ones are, I believe they're really into The Wizard of Oz right off the bat. A couple others, nothing super spring to mind. But this is the thing. It's these very forgettable 90s movies. It would be like... they were into like The Siege or something, you know, just these sort of random action movies.
The Siege, that's the Denzel Washington one where terrorists blow up New York, and it's like Edward Zwick directed. Bruce Willis is like the torture general in that movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the kind of it's that sort of movie. I mean, another one that they love is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because in that movie, they love it.
Is it the lizard people?
The lizard people?
Well, at one point, Hunter S. Thompson he gets a vial of adrenochrome.
Where'd you get this?
Never mind, it's absolutely pure.
What kind of monster client have you hooked up with this time?
Satanism freak.
I think there's only one source for this stuff. The adrenaline gland from a living human body.
I know. The guy didn't have any cash to pay me.
And
right.
the other guy says, you know, I got this. You can only get this from a pedophile.
Yes, sir. They nailed this guy for child molesting. Christ, what could I say? Even a goddamn werewolf is entitled to legal counsel.
And
Hunter S. Thompson made that up for the novel Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Like, he is the source of all this adrenochrome shit. He this guy's like famous for making like the whole thing about Ed Muskie being on Ibogaine. Like, he loved making up fake drug stories. And I mean, he said as much about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So I guess I never put two and two together that, yeah, Hunter S. Thompson was the guy who invented the adrenochrome mythology.
Exactly. And they cite that. And so now if you pull up that scene on YouTube, you know, it's all just, you know, Q, you know, the storm is coming in the comments.
What did they, because I remember the adrenochrome scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and like Benicio del Toro turns into like a fucking demon, and it's presented like the world's most powerful hallucinogen. It's just like a drug beyond all others. How do Q believers who actually believe adrenochrome is a real thing? I mean, like the lurid detail about how you have to harvest it from like a suffering child's pineal gland is especially lurid. But what do they think that like adrenochrome does for the people who ingest it?
Yeah, I mean, they think it's like the fountain of youth. You know, it keeps you alive forever. It keeps you looking young. And so, for example, when you know and as you said, it can only be harvested through like true detective style rituals. You know, you can't just, you know, tap a kid and take it out. And so so for example,
just right on their forehead. You just put
all right, tip him over.
And like, you can't just put them in front of an iPad and throw on Blue's Clues or something. They'll be loving that. So you need the real shit.
And so, you know, then this plays into these other aspects of the lore. So when, you know, celebrities started getting COVID, they would say, oh, Tom Hanks, of course, he came down number one. You know, maybe they tainted the adrenochrome supply with COVID. Or when, you know, they had to do when like Ellen was hosting her show from home, you know, she's looking a little haggard. She doesn't have a makeup artist. They were saying, oh, she ran out of adrenochrome. You know, the supplies got disrupted.
Had they? I don't understand. I mean, obviously the Clintons are very central to this. Have any of them seen Bill Clinton? He looks like a walking corpse. Like before COVID, he looked like death. The adrenochrome clearly not working on him.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. I mean, that's a guy who is looking rough, even just kind of for his age in general. And so you would think, he's kind of, king adrenochrome in the mythos.
I mean, back to I love the detail about Ellen hosting her show from home. Like she looks rough. Ellen is looking terrible. Her adrenochrome supply has been cut off. But I guess like the Q obsession with celebrities and the idea of like Hollywood clones and like Tom Hanks has been compromised to a permanent end. The fixation on celebrities is like I just always think that makes it like it's so perfect for the Trump era because Trump himself is a creation of like he's a media guy, he's a media bitch, he loves gossiping about celebs, and now there's this whole lore in which it's not just gossip about celebs, you're engaging in like the battle of Armageddon against celebrities.
Oh yeah, and you're pitting celebrities against each other so that every time a celebrity dies, it's because they were really about to blow the lid on the cabal. Avicii, Robin Williams were all murdered by the cabal, or maybe they faked their deaths and they're still alive. So you can kind of you can kind of play with it like you like. They have they have whistleblowers. There was a bit player on Vanderpump Rules who said that all these guys were big time pedos. And so, him
and Tom Sandoval briefly had a funk rock group together on that show called Get It Up Your Ass and Dance or something, I think was the name of the song.
I think it was, I will say I've been watching the show for the first time and suddenly I was like, oh, it's the QAnon guy. It's Touch in Public.
Let's touch in public.
Touch in Public. Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're making a good point here about the way it lets you kind of valorizes America's celebrity obsession, whereas before maybe you're feeling a little dirty reading Us Weekly, stuff like that. But instead, and you can also, there's kind of a masculine coding to this, which is now you're watching all these videos and looking for the clues, and you're hunting. You're a digital soldier.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, like normally I'd just be like a movie obsessed weirdo reading the trades, being like, ooh, Lionsgate to announce 3-picture deal with Harrison Ford or something like that. But no, now I am, like you said, I'm Russ Cole. I'm fucking connecting the dots. I'm fucking, this is hard boiled detective work I'm doing here. But well, I wanted to ask you, like, QAnon, it cropped up very shortly after the election of Donald Trump. And like, I'm wondering if like, do you have any thoughts of like, do you see QAnon as related in any way, or like a sort of the next iteration of, like, for instance, what the Tea Party was in reaction to a Democratic administration? Because the odd thing here is I would expect QAnon to happen if Hillary Clinton became president, because there always does seem to be, like, at least starting with the Tea Party or like the moral majority before that, these kind of slightly astroturfed, but like, but in some sense genuine, like conservative populist political movements that arise usually in response to a Democratic presidency. How do you view, like, do you view this as connected to that? And what do you make of the fact that it took place during Trump's first term in office as opposed to a reaction to a Democratic president?
Yeah, I mean, it is very weird. Like you said, I mean, you would think that this would be the time to, when Trump won office, they won. And so now it's time to celebrate. And there's no need for a real like backlash or something that's going to paint moderate Republicans as villains in league with the cabal as well. But I think with QAnon, it emerges when Trump was sort of bogged down in things. The Mueller investigation was starting. He had gotten the tax cuts done, which, if you're a rich guy is great, but I think for the rank and file Trump believer, it didn't do a lot for them. And so it sort of emerges at the time where the sheen is coming off the Trump presidency, if you had really placed a lot of hope in it. And suddenly you're thinking, well, geez, this guy, he hasn't built the wall. He hasn't done the kind of the big wins we wanted. So instead, this thing emerges that says, oh man, it's so much harder for Trump than you realize. It may look like he's this feckless loser who can't get anything done, but in fact, you don't know about the cabal that he's secretly fighting. I mean, that's what he's so busy with.
Will, this sounds identical to like everything I heard from people who were like really into Obama over the two terms that he had in the White House.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Oh, you're a promoter of the Green Lantern theory, I think was the critique
exactly.
Yeah.
But way more boring. Not interesting. No cabals, no underground tunnels, no cannibals, no secret trials at Guantanamo. Just, don't worry, he's taking care of it in a way that I can't specify. He's doing West Wing shit in the background. I mean, I think what was the first Q drop? Hillary Clinton has been arrested. What was one of Trump's main slogans during the campaign? Lock her up. We're going to throw her in jail. Trump was not going to be like every other Republican. And he wasn't like any other Republican. He wasn't a Republican. Like, Trump was never a Republican. He did not emerge from the Republican Party. He was a celebrity who used the Republican Party as a vehicle for his own self-aggrandizement. And the people who came to him through his celebrity. And what his celebrity told them is that things were going to be different. Like, politics as they understood it was going to be over. And it was going to become this much more intense spectacle of retribution and satisfying redemptive violence. And then they didn't get that. They got tax cuts and gridlock. And they needed some way to metabolize that. And then this guy, whoever the hell he was, pops up and says, Hillary Clinton's in prison. She's going to be in jail. And it provided this new node. And it didn't matter that didn't happen. In fact, it's better that didn't happen, because then it provides you another thing. It provides you this trail of breadcrumbs to follow and a way to live in this world that is intolerable, in a parallel imaginative world where everything is coming together. And it has to be more lurid and more intense than anything that the Obama bots had, because the people coming to it are not coming to it from the point of view of traditional political subjects. This is a new type of political subjectivity created by this fucking game show host as president. Like, the degree to which that brought people into the political process who would otherwise have never been political can't be really overstated. And that's why QAnon has been this magnet for people who were not political, had no partisan preferences before this, and were, like weird, crunchy health nuts or yoga people or crystal people who didn't really have any politics, because politics didn't speak to them, because it was inert and dead. This is a live fantasy imagination world premised on the idea of being entertaining, of being fun to absorb, as opposed to the spinach eating of traditional politics, which is why I got to ask, I'm sure Will has this question on his list, but I really got to ask, where are the Q people now with Trump versus DeSantis?
Oh, man.
Because DeSantis is the guy who's trying to turn the Trump phenomenon into bare politics, into a collection of policy proposals, and then he just gets to represent them. Whereas Trump is still politics as, explosive personal spectacle. How are the Q people responding to that?
Well, so far, I think they're still lining up behind Trump. I mean, we started to see Trump lay the groundwork for DeSantis as a pedophile. Right, like he's, he had this picture of Trump, DeSantis with some high school kids when he was a teacher, and he
that's weird. I'm sorry, that's a weird thing to do. That's a weird thing to want to do, to hang out with high school kids when you're their fucking teacher.
And I mean, that like a party people are drinking, and Trump does the classic, he's maybe not all the way there. He's not saying, this guy's a pedo. He's saying, oh no, not Ron. Could this be true?
Well, I mean, like, Matt, you bring up the example of like Ron DeSantis trying to take the Q phenomenon and bring it into the realm of policy. I think we're seeing an example of that today, where he just announced that he was revoking Disney World's like special economic zone status in the greater Orlando area. So yeah, like, we are now occupying Disney World. We're going in there. We're going to the Magic Kingdom. We're finding those mole children. We're going to get them out. We're going to find Walt Disney's head and all the mole children all the mole children in the freezer along with Walt. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, so far, I mean, I think the kind of the leaders of QAnon, and I think these kind of MAGA Twitter people more broadly realize that if DeSantis is in charge, it's not going to be fun for them. It's going to be, all these sort of random apparatchiks getting appointed to destroy universities, stuff like that. It's not going to be this kind of wily, woolly zoo where, random people are getting White House press briefings to, scream at officials, stuff like that.
Will, can we talk about the mole children for a second?
Yes.
Because the mole children, they come up quite a bit in your reporting. Could you just give us like the executive summary? Like, what are the mole children, and how do they figure into the QAnon lore? Because I remember in the early days of COVID in New York City, like the U.S. Navy sent one of their like hospital ships to like a dock in New York Harbor to like take over some of like the excess overflow of like there were not enough beds being available in New York City for all the sick people. And I remember reading like a QAnon thing about like, oh, like this is all cover. The hospital ship is for the mole children. The mole children have been liberated and they've been taken to the hospital ship where they're receiving medical treatment and being debriefed. And I remember just thinking at that time, like, just like I'm out. Like reality is like no longer for me. I'm just watching movies from now on. But well, like who are the mole children? Where are they being kept? What is up with all these tunnels?
Yeah, the mole children, we got to free them is the bottom line. I mean, the gist is these are supposed, the QAnon people say 600,000 kids go missing a year, which would be this enormous number. Well, where do they go? They end up in the tunnels is the thinking. And that's where they're getting drained for their adrenochrome. And, they call them DUMBs. They think they live in DUMBs, which are deep underground.
Deep underground military base. That's one of my favorite pieces of conspiracy lore. And DUMBs do exist, by the way. And there are tunnels connecting some of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so you have these things where, like I said, every time it rains, maybe they're drowning out the tunnels. Or every time there's an earthquake, it means, the good guys are in a pitched battle in the tunnels. And so, as you said, during COVID, the tunnel stuff got really big. They set up, hospitals in Central Park, and that was thought to be rescuing the mole children, or the hospital ships as well. In fact, a guy in LA, this train engineer, derailed a train near the hospital ship because he wanted to reveal the truth about what was going down. So, I mean, people really believe in the tunnels. The one thing I'd add about the tunnels is they believe they have maps of the tunnels. It's not just metaphorical. So there are all these shirts that say "Save the Kids" on the front. And I saw that and I thought, okay, it's kind of a crypto QAnon thing. And then on the back, it's just the map of the tunnel. So, I mean, it's much more explicit about their QAnon beliefs.
We were talking a little bit about like what policy would look like, and the QAnon being a sort of response to like, or an answer for why the wall hasn't been built yet, why Hillary Clinton hasn't been arrested yet, why Trump is mostly just governing like a regular Republican president. Well, I found the most gut-wrenching parts of your book were when you profiled people who, for them, QAnon was not something that they were looking to explain a political reality or to like achieve something concrete, like building a wall on the U.S.-Mexican border. It's the people who believe that when when this great awakening happens, or when Trump finally takes over, they will get a cure for the cancer that's killing them, or for like the autism that their child has. You profile a number of people who just basically are like weren't even treating their disease because they feel like, oh, well, the storm's going to happen any day now, and Trump will just release the cancer cure for the tumor that's killing me. And these are people without health insurance too.
Yeah, I mean, this is, as you said, I think this is one of the sadder parts, and also one of the ones that really hits about how much of QAnon belief and conspiracy theories in general and is just driven by this economic desperation. And so, I heard from a woman who whose kid is mentally disabled and is getting bullied in school. This he can't get the right educational treatment, but the cabal is about to be defeated and they'll really secure for autism. Or as you said, a guy who had cancer but was feeling pretty good about it and felt he didn't need treatment because soon this would all be resolved. There's this real like financial and medical aspect to QAnon that I think is often underplayed. They think that Trump would sign into law this bill that would sort of usher in there's an Iraqi dinar aspect to it. All this free money stuff would come flowing in. And so, if you rent a house, you'll own the house. And if you have
student debt was a big one of them. They thought student debt was going to be eliminated by Trump as well, or once the prophecy is fulfilled.
Exactly. Like all this, in this utopian world where Barack Obama is in Guantanamo Bay and stuff. The good news is that, debt will be abolished and everyone will have all this free stuff. We'll have, med beds that'll sort of like a tanning bed that'll cure any ailment, stuff like this.
Like the movie Elysium. QAnon people should get into that movie. But yeah, when I'm reading your book, Will, I was just struck by like how deeply spiritual and like metaphysical this yearning is to like really like to create like, I don't know, peace on earth, harmony among all men. The lion lay down with the lamb. Like war will end, disease will end, poverty and suffering will go away. And I guess it's just the idea is like is it that like the sicko demonic elites already avail themselves of all of this great medicine and things, and then like as soon as they're defeated, like the cancer cure that they're all been taken advantage of, it will now become, I don't know. There's a cancer cure that exists and is going to be in the public domain as soon as we can get rid of the pharmaceutical lobby.
Yeah, the idea really is that sort of everything bad in the world is due to this cabal, and if only we could keep Trump in office long enough and really crack down on his opponents, then we would live in heaven. One of the most popular QAnon promotional videos, which was embraced by, among others, Kurt Schilling, was, imagine a world with no war. This cabal is behind all the wars that have happened in thousands of years, all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think the point about metaphysical yearning is right. This idea of, politics is about more than, am I going to get a tax cut or is my school district going to be better? But it's about, if it's even about that at all. But, it's about, we can really achieve something, on a utopian level.
Returning to like examples of people for whom belief in this has led to like truly dramatic and horrible things in their lives. Could you talk about the story of Cynthia Abkug and her belief that her child had been kidnapped?
Yeah, this is a really crazy story. There's kind of this true crime aspect to a couple of the chapters in the book. So this is a woman who, again, lived on the margins of society in many ways. She had a couple kids and had run into trouble in Florida with. They were getting suspicious that she had a Munchausen's by proxy situation where they suspected she was like dosing her infant child with marijuana, all this stuff. So she moves to Colorado, and eventually, the authorities there aren't thrilled with her either, and they take her, I think maybe 3 or 4 year old son away, put him in a foster home. And rather than, it's a pretty dire situation, rather than maybe get a lawyer or try to improve her life, get some mental health treatment, if that was even possible, she becomes kind of a QAnon cause celeb. And they start saying, well, they kidnapped Cynthia's kid, and, this kid's going to Comet Ping Pong effectively. And, we got to get him out of this foster home. And so they start raising money. They send a guy who is kind of a hazy background as an ex-sniper, possibly. It's very unclear. He's got some guns, and they start plotting an armed attack on the foster home. Fortunately, her daughter tips off the police, but by the time they get there, they've kind of begun this sort of countrywide odyssey to escape the FBI, hang out with really weird characters. They run into a JFK Jr. impersonator at one point. Then it kind of, once the danger's gone from the story, it kind of becomes like a Coen Brothers sort of situation.
And you had another anecdote about another story you reported on about this is a guy who was promising to help people get their kids back from some sort of cabal engineered ordered foster home or something like that, and then he ended up getting murdered by one of the people that he was helping.
Yeah, this was another crazy one. He's kind of part of this whole larger kidnapping movement, and this is a guy who said, Trump has empowered me to create my own court system, so don't worry, we'll get your kid back because you don't have to deal with family courts. And so these women, there are a lot of women all across the country doing this who would be sort of duped into this, and they had these recruiters on Facebook, and they would send all this money to this guy who was like a random guy in northern Florida. And he had sort of one of his acolytes becomes convinced that he's working for the cabal, because what other reason would there be that she couldn't get her kid back? Because, he claims to have all the answers. And so then, she hasn't been convicted yet, but essentially what happened is that she went to see him and, said, hey, pal, where's my kid? Boom, boom, boom. And lit him up. And so he was ultimately murdered sort of by these delusions that he had fed.
See, that's amateur hour right there. If you're gonna get these people's hopes up like that, you got to have some sort of plan. Like you hire a kid to come and say that they're their kid and that they did plastic surgery on them or
changeling situation,
genetic mutations or something. Whatever. You got to have something. Just draw a hand on your fucking fist, like Senior Wences or something. You don't just go sorry, because I don't think they'll take no for an answer.
This guy was the dangers of believing your own hype. Like you said, Will, he invented his own legal system based on the emoluments clause. Is that how you say that?
Yeah, the emoluments clause.
It's called E clause, and he was just and had been laughed out of every court that he was in, but he was promising these people that like, oh, like I have the legal authority to return your child who's been taken away by the state to you. And then they believed it. And then when the court cases were, failing, this woman was like, well, obviously he's in on it and has kidnapped my child as well, brought a gun to his house and allegedly killed him with it.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
No, I want to talk about like there's a lot of great cute characters in this book, but I wanted to talk about my favorite, a guy that I learned about reading this book. I'd never heard of him before. But Will, could you hip our listeners to Austin Steinbart and his like a guy who has come up with, I think it's just a screenplay idea for me. Like he has a very interesting sci-fi concept that explains how he is actually cute. Like he's claiming Q for himself, but he has a very interesting like sci-fi concept that I'd like to explore here.
Yeah, so this is a guy who, in reality, was like an IT guy in his 20s in Arizona, and then in 2020 he emerges after getting laughed out of some previous QAnon vigilante groups. He's a very, I would say, unnerving guy. Like he comes across as very slick, but in a very practiced way. And so he emerges with a YouTube video and he says, "Hey, guess what? I'm Q." And his argument is that the guy writing the Q messages is him 30 or 40 years in the future. And he's using a time machine, effectively, a time computer, to send the messages back to present day Austin. And so he's going to be Q in the future. And so his followers call him Baby Q. And so he claims that he has used these clues and other messages. So he said, let's say old Q in 2005 or 2009 said, "Hey, Austin, buy a ton of Bitcoin." So now Austin's a billionaire, and they're going to use this to fund the Space Force and all this kind of stuff.
This sounds like the kind of like Frequency, that film with Jim Caviezel, who honestly, if you got him on the right day, might believe this guy.
Oh, well, I mean, we know Jim Caviezel's a QAnon guy, so yeah, it wouldn't be too much further.
But like in the Steinbart story, like eventually the FBI comes and visits him, and he's like, "Oh, finally, great, fellow agents of the government. Yes. Nice to meet you, Mulder and Scully." And like they begin to interrogate him, and then you describe it as like every defense lawyer's worst nightmare, where he's like, "Well, obviously I traffic drugs across the Mexican border, duh," and like just started copping to all these crimes. But then, curiously, the FBI didn't arrest him then. They let him keep doing this shit
because he loved boasting about crimes, because his point was he claimed to be an agent for the Defense Intelligence Agency, which, as far as we know, isn't true. But he would kind of commit these crimes flagrantly to say, "Look, I'm untouchable." And so, for example, he went to this brain clinic and got like Terry Bradshaw's
okay, like this story is when I was really, really digging it. Like he is in a medical clinic taking photos of like the fucking the Lincoln Tunnel sized holes in Terry Bradshaw's brain from CTE, and then posting it on the internet. And he's like, "Look, I can do it. I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency."
Yeah, and he would say like, "This is pretty messed up, right? That I'm doing this, but I can do it." And so. And,
Has Terry Bradshaw sued this asshole? I mean,
right. I mean, he did like 30 NFL players. So he did that. He threatened to murder the Queen of Denmark. He said, "Oh, I smuggled drugs." We all know intel agencies smuggle drugs all the time. He said there was this guy who had actually in real life killed himself, set himself on fire, a prominent figure in Phoenix. And he said, "Oh, that was me. I murdered that guy." So he did like some real crimes, seemingly some fake ones. And the FBI comes to the door and he answers it with a Desert Eagle. And he says, "Yo, what's up? I'm glad you avoid all the landmines I strew across my property." And so the FBI talks to him and he says, "Oh yeah, I do this, I do that." And then they leave and they don't charge him for a while. And at this point, like you, Will, my editor was like, "Is there a missing paragraph here? How could they not charge him?" And I said, "I don't know. They just let him go."
Well, maybe he's actually a government agent. Have you thought about that?
Well, basically, thank you, Austin Steinbart, because I basically, without even knowing it, I stole your whole idea of messages being sent from the future into the past for my understanding of how to watch movies. Movie Mindset, the podcast, coming in April. No, but I do like at the end of it, though, like eventually he is now... he had violated bail restrictions against drinking and smoking weed, and the police discovered a Whizzinator prosthetic penis in his house meant to cheat drug tests. So he has been caught breaking rules. He's on pretrial release, and the judge has just ordered him held until his trial. So I guess his security clearance in the future hasn't come through yet. But that was a great story.
The one thing I'd add about that, Will, when I was hanging out with his followers, they said, you wrote about the Wizinator thing. That's fake news. That's not true. And I said, okay, well, what is it? And they said, well, it was a kind of a cheaper brand of fake penis that we were using.
That store brand Wizinator. You're paying for branding. I'm not an idiot.
Look, I paid for a regular fleshlight. The Lisa Ann fleshlight is an extra $30. It's all just synthetic pussy to me.
Let's touch upon it. It's rascal liquors, girl, I wanna burn it. Let's touch upon it. The way your body looks, I wanna be your bourbon.
All right, well, and none of my favorite Q character of a guy that I was already aware of before reading the book. You've been around him. Let's talk about the God, JFK Jr., a.k.a. Vincent Fuchsia. Vincent Fuchsia, like this guy, the thing that was insane to me from reading your book about this guy is apparently he has not made any money off of being the JFK Jr. guy for Q people.
I mean, so he claims. And as far as I can tell, there isn't a sort of an obvious way he could have made money unless he's getting donations from someone. But as you said, I mean,
I hope he got laid at least.
Well, I suspect he did because having seen him he gets a
lot of attention from the fair sex at these QAnon rallies.
This is noted in the book are a lot of very lovely middle-aged women who say, "Oh my gosh, he's here!" And they come up and I said to this one woman, I said, "I mean, he doesn't look anything like JFK Jr." And she said, "Haven't you heard of Hollywood? Haven't you heard of Medea?"
I lost it when I read that part. When I read that, he's like, "Haven't you seen The Grinch and Medea?" So is the idea that that JFK Jr. is going out in Medea like prosthetic makeup every time he leaves the house, or is it that the original JFK Jr. was in prosthetic makeup?
The idea is that Vincent Fusca, he's wearing a fat suit. I mean, he's not a fat guy, but
he's
some
not
kind
even
of
fat.
Suit.
Like
yes. Haven't you seen the Crumps? But what I find maddening about this guy is, I mean, this is a guy who really was sort of plucked because he was mega Trump supporter, was always behind Trump at these rallies, and people said, I think that's JFK Jr. So this is a guy who has stumbled into this, and he knows what's going on. He wears George magazine shirts and stuff like this. But every time I run into him, he's a super nice guy, but he just won't. I'll say, so can we talk about why all these people are obsessed with you? And he'll say, oh, why don't we talk in an hour? Here's my number. And then
that's what I thought was so cool about him is because like he has all these women coming up to him and being like, oh my God, you're JFK Jr. And he never agrees with them. He always leaves it unsaid. He just sort of nods, smiles, and takes the photo with these ladies who are like, going nuts for him. So like he knows what he's doing, but man, oh man, what a fucking niche that guy has found for himself. Because, I mean, but going back to the thing, like the very first Q drop didn't fucking happen, and it didn't happen like very quickly after it said it was. The most famous, like one of the most famous Q guys, looks nothing like fucking JFK Jr. He looks nothing like him. Not even close. He's like a foot shorter than him too. Like what is going on here?
He soaks it up. I mean, there's one there. I was at this one of these kind of pre-January 6th events, and all these kind of this rabble of people were walking by, and he was just singing karaoke. He had a little speaker set up, and he was just like, "Look, JFK Jr.
What song was he
feels
doing?
like singing to you." Oh, I can't remember.
We didn't start the fire. But well, I mean, you talk about like covering these QAnon events and like talking to Q believers or having people approach you, and like most Americans, they're polite to a fault. They're not just coming up to you and talking to you about the mole children or all the Hollywood pedophiles they're going to execute if their plan ever succeeds. But like, how do you relate to like the true believers when you interview them, when they approach you? Often they will think that like you're on their side because you're talking about QAnon. Like, what is your perception about like the not the media celebrities and like the YouTube internet people, but like the actual QAnon believers when you just like try to interview them or see them or they interact with you? What's your read on them?
Yeah, I mean, they're often very, very nice. I mean, I think they tend to be, older and are often very, at least the nice ones are the older ones. Sort of the ones in their 20s you have to watch out for, because that's often someone who is,
feral grapers,
some kind of failed actor type or something like that. But the ones who are just like, I'm just out to help the kids, at least to me, they're usually very nice, except when, some of them have like tomahawks and stuff and they're threatening to kill me. But in aggregate, they're nice and they're very vague, and they say, well, I got into QAnon because of the corruption. And then you say, well, what do you mean by the corruption? And they say, oh, it's the tunnels. Once you kind of poke them a little, one woman I talked to is the opening of the book. This woman who was just extremely into QAnon is kind of this ranting about the tunnels on January 6th. And then I thought, well, that was a pretty nice lady. And then, when I was writing the book, I looked her up and, she caught a charge for January 6th for just, dismantling barricades and all this. But in terms of, they can be a very difficult group to deal with. Sometimes they're pretty nice. When I was at a rally and I kind of wear a hat, some sunglasses, kind of look a little so no one really clocks me across the room. And one guy goes, Will Sommer. And I was like, oh shit. And he just wanted a selfie. So sometimes, as you said, sometimes they think I'm kind of their buddy, and working to spread the good word about QAnon.
What is your take on the sort of like the demographic makeup of the average Q believer? Because, similar to Donald Trump, we're often told that he is the voice of working class America. And, I don't know how true that is. I think that, there's a lot of things that you could divide up. It's certainly true that the Democratic Party is certainly becoming the party of rich people in this country. But what is it about, sort of back to my original question, what is it about QAnon that seems to resonate among people with, if not a blue collar lifestyle, then at least a blue collar aesthetic, kind of whether they're middle class, working class, I don't know, who knows anymore in America, but this is an anti-elite kind of populist ideology. And I'm wondering your read on the sort of the class and demographic makeup of Q believers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think often the classic QAnon believer is someone at a Trump rally. So they're older, maybe evangelical Christian, white, pretty white. And then, during the pandemic, we started to see that change a lot. We started to see more people of color, more women, younger people get into it because they were seeing this this kind of save the children stuff there. It was spreading on, it was very yoga, Instagram, and kind of wellness communities. And so the demo changed a little bit, but I think you're right that it is a lot of often working class people who, I think conspiracy theories and QAnon in particular give people a sense of agency. And, it's often people who rightly or wrongly feel marginalized in their lives. And, instead you have someone who says, hey, I'm going to give you the secret keys to the world. And you'll see that the rich people you might envy are in fact big time pedophiles and they're sickos. And, one thing that struck me, there's a lot of failed Hollywood people in QAnon. And I think there's an appeal to saying, well, that guy who beat me, his screenplay got picked up, but he had to do some sicko stuff, at the Playboy Mansion or whatever. But I'm pure. And so, success won't come to me, but, I'm right with God. And, at least I'm not drinking kids' blood.
Yeah. In terms of how it's evolved and where it's going, do you see QAnon as something that is holistically, organically, just the natural evolution of all the insane shit that the right wing in this country believes for decades, or has it evolved into something different that has sort of broke containment from the conservative movement proper?
Yeah, I think it's broken its containment. I think the idea of the clues and this character Q was kind of a genius way to fold in so many other conspiracy theories and to give people something to look forward to, that they that the storm is coming, that it's not just, you're not researching some old conspiracy theory that who cares, ultimately whatever you find. And yeah, I think the idea of this kind of satanic cabal is sort of denatured for some legitimate reasons, like Jeffrey Epstein has become sort of more popularized in the culture more broadly. And so, I think, I think it no longer are these conspiracy theories like stuff in the past like Jade Helm or Seth Rich that really sort of struggled to gain traction. I think QAnon has taken off in a much more effective way.
And in terms of it breaking containment, or what separates it from the traditional lore and boogeymen that make up right wing mythology and has for decades in this country, particularly evangelical Christian or just a right wing Republican frame of mind. Do you see the evidence of it breaking containment in that and I'm not saying that this is I don't know, legitimate or heartfelt or whatever, but at least in its lore and its propaganda, that Q believers have begun to turn on the idea of capitalism, or at least corporate capitalism and big corporations, because they're now woke and gay and satanic. It's hard to imagine, for instance, the Tea Party or Rush Limbaugh, that era of talk radio, Fox News, conservatism, selecting for its demon of the week, corporate America.
Yeah, totally. I was just thinking about this because really sort of the big QAnon villain of the past year or so is the World Economic Forum and Davos and the guy who runs it, Klaus Schwab, and this idea that they're going to do the Great Reset on us and make us live in pods and eat bugs. And I think before, when these groups were funded by the Koch brothers, or you had these kind of mega broadcasters doing it, they wouldn't just be sicking people on these massive corporations. Whereas now, who's directing QAnon? Michael Flynn is issuing stuff, and really even further down, it's just a bunch of guys with Telegram channels. So those guys don't care. I mean, they're happy to paint nefarious corporations as the villains.
What is up with Michael Flynn, by the way? Because hasn't he disowned QAnon recently, or say don't even tell me about that? It's all made up, and I've always said as much.
He's a very bizarre figure, and no fan of mine. He once announced that I was about to be booted from a QAnon convention because I was sitting there, and he starts going, "A bunch of sicko journalists snuck in here today," and I was looking around like, "Oh, someone's in trouble." And they grabbed me. But yeah, Flynn is a guy who I think looked at QAnon and said, just getting in his head, I think he said, I got some legal bills to pay. And he's also a guy who loves conspiracy theories. And so he started, appearing at these conventions and auctioning off, quilts with big Qs on them. And he got really into it. He filmed him and his family did the QAnon oath. And now suddenly that it's getting, I think the heat's on a little bit. He's saying, his family members are suing CNN for saying they took the oath. And what you refer to is...
There's a video! Are they going to say that didn't happen?
They say it's not a QAnon oath. It's a message of family solidarity.
It's a message of fandom for the Ridley Scott film White Squall, starring Jeff Bridges.
What you're referring to, Will, is the Lynn Wood, who's kind of another QAnon guy, secretly recorded Michael Flynn saying, "Oh yeah, I think it's a CIA psyop." And then he later put out this recording, and so you have this situation where Michael Flynn, it's like, all right, you think it's a psyop, but one that I'm happy to participate in, and presumably earn speakers fees and stuff like that.
Will, do you have in all your QAnon odyssey here and putting together this book and your research, do you have a favorite QAnon character or piece of deep lore that even with something that didn't make the book, do you just have a favorite piece nugget or personality of from the Q universe?
Yeah. Oh man. Gosh, you hit so many. I mean, Austin Steinbart, Vincent Fusca, all timers. I think this guy who always sticks with me is this guy named Patriot Street Fighter, and this is a guy who he drives a motorcycle, and so but not really. It's kind of he tows it between his convention stops, and so he'll say does anyone have a tow jack, or can someone drive the truck, and so then he rolls up and but he wields a tomahawk, and his he a bunch of people caught COVID on his tour, and he was just like, oh, it's got to be a bio attack, But actually, if I could just fit in one more favorite guy, because I thought of another, is this guy named Juan O'Savin, who is another JFK Jr. impersonator and sort of a more malevolent one, I would say. He's Vincent Fusca, he's kind of out there.
No, he seems cool. He seems nice. I would love to meet Vincent Fusca.
Exactly. I mean, he's a cool guy. I mean, I'd like to hang out with him more, but this guy his real name's Wayne Willett. He's like a somewhat controversial private investigator in Washington State.
Okay.
Doing is a guy who's doing workers' comp? Is he mowing the lawn, filming people doing that stuff? And somehow he's become like Roseanne's QAnon guru, and he's super and Jim Caviezel. Him and Jim Caviezel traveled across the country together. It's very bizarre, and but he organized this coalition of people to run for Secretary of State across the country. And a bunch of 5 or 6 of them got the Republican nomination in battleground states. Fortunately, they all lost. But this was a guy who was weirdly poised to become a power play in the Republican Party. They were at this convention, and he just someone was like, Juan O'Savin knocked on my door, and he said, we got to save America. And everyone was like, yeah. So a very sinister figure, I would say.
So I guess going to January 6th, right? Because January 6th is fascinating to me, and as it relates to QAnon, because the storm happened, right? The storm came to Washington. They did the thing that they were all fantasizing about, and once again, nothing happened. And whether you go back from the first fucking proof saying Hillary Clinton's going to get arrested to Donald Trump losing, whether you think it was stolen from him or whatever, but Joe Biden is in the White House right now, not Donald Trump. how do you view QAnon? Like, I know the QAnon candidates did not do so hot in this latest midterm election. Is this a spent force politically, or is this like a classic when prophecy failed situation in which because there have been so many failures of Q's proofs to come true, right? And now Donald Trump is not president. I mean, maybe he's running for president again. Maybe the storm just continues. Is this a force on the wane, or is this just prophecy failing and mutating, at every single point of failure, mutating into something different and harder to understand, but ultimately even more embedded into American culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the latter. I think, as you said, January 6th failing was a big setback for them, and really bigger than that was Biden's inauguration. I mean, I talked to people because Trump had to be in office to make the storm happen. I talked to QAnon believers who said, "Oh, I'm going to throw up. I feel so sick. What have I done?" But I think as Trump returns to prominence and we start, if he runs, particularly if he wins the primary, I think either we could see QAnon in kind of classic form revived, or we could see, but I think what's going to happen no matter what is we're going to see this mutate into something else. Maybe it won't be called QAnon. Just as with Pizzagate, once the guy shot up the pizza parlor, people said, "Oh, we kind of can't call ourselves Pizzagaters anymore."
I totally forgotten about that because, as he was walking out of Comet Ping Pong Pizza, he says, after failing to find the non-existent basement, he says, "My intelligence on this wasn't 100%."
Yes, exactly. Sort of said, "Well, I look a little silly right now," and that changed. There were lawsuits and people stopped calling it Pizzagate, and then it reemerged as QAnon. So I think unless something really radical changes in the American psyche, I think we will see QAnon in some form continuing, and I think enough people have bought into it that it is really only going to continue to grow.
I do think we're going to get some version of the storm eventually somewhere, even if it's just some state government hauling a few people in front of kangaroo court. But at some point, if people keep getting elected at the grassroots and to these elected offices, they're going to keep getting pushed up till eventually they're somewhere near a lever of power. And, you just have to take as a constant declining quality of life and increased psychological torment and paranoia. And if the trends continue,
well, Matt, we're seeing in Utah already the police investigated a sort of troublesome, comparatively liberal DA. They said he was being investigated for involvement in satanic rituals and all this stuff. So, I mean, we're already starting to see become actual prosecutions.
And I mean, another aspect of your book that I thought was fascinating is how much QAnon has spread to foreign countries. I'm talking Germany, Japan, Australia. And this is a real, you don't even go here kind of moment. But how is QAnon relevant to people in, I mean, look, it's not that hard to figure out because America is the global superpower. It's hard to. Why are people in Germany being oh, well, what the U.S. government doesn't affect me? I mean, we just blew up their fucking pipeline that keeps their houses warm in the winter. So it was not hard to look at the demonology of American politics and adopt it for your own because our demons really do affect the rest of the world. But how do you view the QAnon going international and what are they concerned about? And is it the same shit that they're concerned about in QAnon America, or is it tailored to specific the politics of Germany or Australia or Japan?
It's incredibly weird. I mean, in Japan, for example, they've adopted all these things, and so there's two rival QAnon factions there that are called Q Army Flynn and Q Army Anti Flynn or something. This has inspired crimes. There was a QAnon kidnapping group in France as well. But I mean, Germany, I think, is the most interesting one. And as you said, they do adapt these things, and so they say, if there's a tariff on farmers to try to get them to use gas less, then this becomes part of the cabal's plan. In Germany, they think there's this kind of separate movement called the Reichsbürger that thinks essentially that Otto von Bismarck's empire is still in effect, and that the world they live in now is a fake one and sort of a fiction of the Allies. So they're kind of like sovereign citizens, and they've really latched on to QAnon. And people may remember a few months ago there was this supposed coup attempt involving some police and soldiers, and those guys were. And you may remember there was a former noble, and he was really swagged out, he had some great suits, and so that guy is a QAnon affiliated guy.
Yes, the the Otto von Bismarck's empire never ended. And look, Germans, if you're not satisfied, if you don't like fake Germany as like a legal and political construct, then I'm sorry, you shouldn't have done World War II. Yes, like the Allies did impose a fake Germany on you, but like
Yes.
it got out of hand. Okay, like
It proves that the natural state of Germany is 2,000 tiny principalities. That's where it should always. They never should have gotten. They should have gone back to that after World War One. Like Holy Roman Empire is back. You people can't handle statehood.
We need like mischievous bishops and stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, I guess like I didn't get a chance to ask you this, but real quick, what do you make of the whole Ron Watkins is Q thing? I know like the HBO QAnon documentary, like that was the reveal, that was the Jinx like moment. How do you view the Watkins father and son duo of the Watkins and like the claim that the son Ron, I believe, was Q this entire time, or at least started out as Q?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's been conclusively proven, but I think it's Ron and Jim Watkins are the sort of the most compelling arguments I've seen for who's Q. There's a lot of crackpot stuff out there saying, it's all these, it's Michael Flynn, it's all these nefarious characters. But I think that documentary, honestly, like I certainly wish I had found my own Q, that I could put in the book. But I think the documentary pretty much nails it as to being those guys. Unless something else comes to light. He had that, as you said, that Jinx moment where he sort of says, well, that's why I've been doing all this with Q and everything. And then he says, well, do you mean you're Q? Is that what you're saying? He says, and kind of dancing around it. I met Ron Watkins, the father, and very weird guy, obviously. And he was wearing all this kind of Q paraphernalia. And I said, so, like, you want to talk about QAnon? And he'd say, oh, what's QAnon? What are you talking about? So kind of a maddening guy like Vincent Fusca.
Amazing. His run for Congress was phenomenal. He tried to run in Arizona, and he did like one debate where he was a complete zero charisma creep that no one liked, and then he just kind of stopped campaigning.
I interviewed him and the campaign strategist who was trying to like turn him around. And so he said, oh, QAnon, I'm not associated with that. And the campaign guy said, oh, yeah, that's true. That's fake. And I said, well, next week you're appearing at a QAnon event. Here's the logo. It's a giant Q. And the strategist starts going, oh, God, oh, God.
Will, I still get you out of this. You mentioned like the World Economic Forum being like the new cast member for this season of QAnon. Like, where do you see, like, where are their interests now? Like, as it evolves, like, I mean, look, your bread and butter is going to be the mole children and the adrenochrome satanic pedophiles, but like, I mean, it's all under that umbrella. But like, where do you see any new plot lines emerging this year, and then also next year, certainly going into a presidential election?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right now. It's really is the woke capital angle. It's I think they're going to start digging into like who runs Vanguard, who runs BlackRock, and I'll tell you what, those guys better not have any weird art in their houses, because if they do, I mean, that's going to kick this thing off.
I mean, I would hate it if the boardroom of BlackRock or Blackstone, I would hate it if they got their lives turned upside down by these lunatics.
And then also, I think they're really going to start going after anyone who runs against Trump in the primary. You guys may have seen this Vivek Ramaswamy guy. Who is sort of a
promising to go to war against Mexico.
Yes, yeah. We got to do a Don Winslow, the cartel. He's going to get rid of all federal agencies and go to war with Mexico to stop fentanyl from coming into America. And so this guy was a World Economic Forum young leader in 2021. And so everyone's saying, hey, buddy, you're the anti-woke capital guy. And he's saying, oh, they made me do that. I told them not to. Ooh, darn it, Klaus Schwab. So I think the kind of Pizzagating, the QAnoning of these guys, and Ron DeSantis too, is really revving up.
All right, we'll leave it there for today. Will Sommer, thanks so much for joining us. The book is Trust the Plan, available in bookstores everywhere. And Will, if people would like more Will Sommer coverage, where should they go? What should they do?
Sure, yeah. So I'm writing for the Daily Beast. I'm on Twitter at Will Sommer, and I have a podcast covering similar topics called Fever Dreams. So yeah, that's where people can find me. All
right, once again, thank you to Will Sommer for joining us. That does it for today. Trust the Plan, where we go one, we go all.
That's I've been signing a couple books with the Where We Go One, We Go All. That's only for true homies.